Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Double A Team Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Nagishi. Thanks for joining us on this Friday night, wherever you are. I'm sure you're probably enjoying the weekend up on us and watching the NCAA game, wherever you might be tonight. And I am stoked to have this guest on our show tonight. I've had this gentleman almost a year ago at this time on our show to talk about the NFL draft. And now, almost a year later, he is back with us again. It is none other than EJ Snyder, co-founder of Bootleg Football, which you can find it on YouTube channel as well. EJ, thank you for joining us. Happy Friday. How are you, sir?
It is indeed Friday. Thanks for having me back. It seems like it hasn't been a year, but it absolutely has. You're correct.
Yes,
and,
sir.
Yeah, we get to talk some football. That seems like a dandy Friday night.
Yeah, my co-host on occasion, Rashab Shakiri from his own YouTube channel, The Windy City Production. We talk a lot about the Bears quite often, and we're going to talk about the Bears as well a little bit later. But we're going to kind of focus, starting off with the free agency and the draft preview. We're going to talk about a little bit about the free agency so far. And EJ, the free agency usually first 2 days come and go quickly, and then it's just basically, bargain shopping. You still have some, veterans out there who are still looking for their home. For Bears fans, Keenan Allen is still available out there, and not too long ago, Tevin Jenkins finally found a home for himself this upcoming season, but it's only for 1 year, of course. And looking at the free agency from on top of your head, obviously the Chicago Bears really made a good use of it. Really addressed the trenches on both sides of the football. Obviously, Trey Smith would have been a number one target, but NFL kind of gave them a lifeline with the increasing salary cap. And then they ended up using a tag on him. So they did the next best thing was Drew Dahlman, who I thought was going to be a number one target for Chicago Bears. And they literally got him for pretty a decent salary. But I think it's 2 years guaranteed out of the 3 years that he signed. Your thoughts on Drew Dahlman signing, and will that really, fix their center problems that they've had for quite a long time?
I hope so. I really hope so. You know that you follow my work, and I've been pounding the table for a center for Chicago for 3 years now. And every year I think, no, they can't not do it this year. And then they didn't. And it wrecked a lot of their offense for the past 3 years. That and injuries combined, but really not being able to solidify that pivot spot and have somebody that they could rely on has hurt them deeply. And I think, like you said, that made Dahlman the obvious number one target. And it was kind of the worst kept secret of free agency, which was, look, yeah, the Bears are going to get Drew Dahlman. Everybody I asked at the combine about Drew Dahlman and the Bears basically told me nothing you wouldn't expect. I haven't heard anything you wouldn't expect, which is, yes, they're in. Yes, they're the leaders in the clubhouse. And, it'll be unlikely if he signs anywhere else. So it's a good move. It's a solidifying move. It's something they needed to do. There isn't a center in this draft. There have been for the last 3 drafts that they could have picked that probably could have started as a rookie presumptively. And, there are players that might do that this year. Gray Zabel might do that this year, but again, it's a position change for him. It's not used to calling protections. So there wasn't a kind of slam dunk in the draft. Being able to fix all 3 interior positions through trades and free agency before you really even got into, day 2 or 3 of free agency was something they needed to do. And I actually think it's probably something Ben Johnson said when he interviewed for the job. Like, look, my offense requires an offensive line that works. We need to upgrade the offensive line significantly, not a little bit, not one guy, not 2 guys. We need to get depth. And he said the same thing at the combine when he was there. When he had his podium session, he said, it's not 5 guys. You don't play 5 guys. You play 8 guys or 9 guys throughout the season with injuries. So we need our best 7 or 8 guys going into the season, or I'm not going to feel good about it. So they've been thorough. They have used multiple avenues so far. I don't know that they're done. I would not be surprised to see another offensive line pick in this draft. Maybe not up high, could be up high, but I don't think so. We'll talk about that in a bit. But it wouldn't surprise me at all for them to continue refilling that so that they feel really, really good about it. It's in a better place than it's been in for some time. I don't think they're probably going to stop.
And I hope so. And like you said, we'll get to the draft questions in a little bit. By the way, if you're joining us tonight, if you have any questions for both of us with regards to Bears or any other team's draft questions, feel free to join in and ask questions. EJ is kind enough to join us for at least about an hour or so. So we'll try and answer as many questions as possible if you have them. So they also added Jonah Jackson from the Rams. He has a history with Ben Johnson's time with Detroit before, of course, he left Detroit to sign with Los Angeles, which his only season there was a complete disaster. And Joe Thuney, who has won 4 Super Bowls with the New England Patriots and Kansas City Chiefs, protected both Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes. Were you kind of surprised that the Bears went on a trade route with the fixing the interior positions, or do you think that this was a smart move considering the amount of money that was being thrown around to, players like, Aaron Banks, who went to division rival Green Bay for almost $20 million. Well, Fries, I think, also went to Minnesota, another division rival, but I think he ended up getting $16 million on a 5-year, $80 million. Is this a right move, or do you feel like maybe the Bears could have gone the other way, in your opinion, in terms of getting the guard position?
I'm pleasantly surprised that they were able to get it done. And specifically with the Thuney move, I think it was borderline brilliant by polls. He's familiar with the Kansas City organization. Obviously, he came from there. And as soon as, again, Trey Smith, who we all wanted and, hoped would come free, didn't come free, he realized with the amount of money they had tied up in Creed Humphrey and Trey that they were probably looking to go cheaper at the other guard spot. So he pivoted immediately to Thuney, and that was really wise. Thuney is a great value, certainly with the money that we got thrown around in free agency this year, not only at the guard spot, but the tackle spot as well. Dan Morgan made out like a bandit. Really the winners in free agency, if you want to talk about winners, are guards and tackles. They made a lot.
They've been paid pretty good the last couple of years, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So I was happy that they could get out ahead of it. It lets you have some control. If you're in a trade, it's largely, especially somebody that wasn't necessarily advertised for trade like Thuney, you're more in a one-on-one situation. You're not bidding against multiple people. Whereas free agency, look, the agent is open for business and he's getting offers. He or she is getting offers all throughout the day and night and just choosing the best one. That can put you behind the 8 ball, and it can really put you in a spot where you end up paying too much and you have to overpay. In a trade, it's more controlled in terms of what your costs are going to be. And you also have a known of, I think we can get this player. You already mentioned Thuney's bona fides. He is one of the best guards in the NFL. That is a tremendous upgrade from where Chicago was last year. So to have that sort of off the board before free agency even started was a real boon. And the Jonah Jackson thing, I think as well, again, his season in LA was injury marred. When he was healthy in Detroit, he was a force. He was one of the best young guards in the league. So it remains to be seen how much of that form he can regain. But again, everything's pointing in the right direction in terms of he's familiar with Ben Johnson's offense. Again, it is a cost-controlled move compared to the players that they could have gotten in free agency. I think are lesser players talent-wise. Again, if everybody's healthy, that actually you're going to end up paying the same or more for. So both of those moves were real stabilizing factors. And then again, we already talked about Dahlman sort of fitting in as the third piece on the first day, but everybody thought that was going to be the first piece on the first day. And then they were still going to have work to do with guard, and to have guard basically solid up also put them in a very strong negotiating position with Tevin in terms of, hey, if you want to come back, it's on our terms, not your terms. We are not desperate. We are set. You're looking for the home. We're going to give you the spot if we want to. Not surprised that didn't happen, but it put Chicago in a very good place, not only heading into free agency, so they didn't have to overspend there, but also to the draft, because now they don't have to go offensive line in one of the top 2 or 3 spots. They can, but they don't have to. And that puts them in a much better place overall. You never want to go into a draft with other teams knowing exactly what you need to pick, because that sets you up from a position of weakness.
Now, on the defensive side, they added 2 defensive linemen. One, a great, a surprise, Grady Jarrett. The day he got released, the Bears snatched him up quickly. And then this was a name that was linked by some experts out there. Colts defensive lineman Dayo Odeyingbo, who went to Vanderbilt and was a very young player, 25. For about, I believe, 16 and a half, 17 sacks in only 4 seasons. How do you grade the addition of Jarrett and Odeyingbo?
I think they really help again because the defensive line had a couple of good players in, Sweat and Javon, and it needed help. And I think everybody knew that they were going to address that probably both in free agency and the draft, but free agency for sure. Again, Grady was a surprise, but Dio, I think, was on everybody's radar because of his size profile and what Dennis Allen prefers at that end or edge spot. Again, younger player, ascending profile, started to see some of the flashes late in his career in Indy. I had a pretty good grade on him coming out, so it was nice. He didn't hit it immediately, but he's starting to live up to that.
He came off an ACL, right?
Yeah, he had an injury late in the process, which was kind of a bummer. I remember he was one of the first guys I watched that year. I watched him with my buddy Craig Stout, who does draft analyst stuff for KCSN. And we were watching one late one night. And I said, "Who do you want to watch, Craig?" He said, "I want to watch Dio." And I was like, "Great." And literally 2 days after we watched Dio, he injured his leg. And we were like, well, that's a bummer. He's, we were both pretty excited about him. So we knew we were kind of going to have to wait a year because, again, the timing of the injury, you have to wait pretty much a full year before they start regaining explosion. And then that was going to put him really into his sophomore season. So a little bit of a delayed start for him. I think a lot of people forgot about him. I think he's a good fit for the defense, not only size-wise, but play style-wise for Dennis Allen. The money's not terrible. Again, you have a young player who could hit his ceiling in Chicago, which is really nice, as opposed to a player who's already hit his ceiling somewhere else and you're just hoping he holds on. And then Grady was a complete surprise. He was a surprise cut and a surprise addition. They prioritized it. He got a big contract. He's a really interesting player because I don't really think Chicago had a player quite like him. Javon does some of the things that Grady does, but not all of them. And when you have the rotation between Billings, Grady Jarrett, and Javon Dexter, now you've got a strong trio on the inside that you can really rotate and kind of mix and match because they have different strengths and different skills. Grady is a fantastic player, and I think most people saw in his podium session when he got to Chicago that he is going to be a fan favorite. He wants to be here. He is excited about Chicago. He is excited about the Bears, the history, being part of this organization, being part of a turnaround. He realizes where the Bears' fortunes have been
on that press conference there.
He's jazzed. Yeah. And he's a great player. He can bring a lot of impact. I do not think he's done. Is he descending? Yes, he's not the player he was a couple of years ago pre-injury, but he's not done. That doesn't mean he's washed. That just means he's less than, one of the 5 top defensive tackles in the league, which he was at his peak.
Absolutely. Now, looking at the rest of the free agency, DJ, who are some of the winners, whether it's a player or team, losers, a player or team? Who do you have as the winners in this free agency so far?
Well, without sounding too much like a homer, Chicago improved their situation a lot. And I'm not alone in that, analysis. Lots of national folks have said Chicago was either 1 or 2 on their list from where they started to where they ended up, the combination of trades and free agency. They have changed that team in a functional way on both sides of the ball where there were deep, deep needs. And they not only sort of met or filled them, they went out and got some very good players, especially guys like Joe Thuney with pedigree that I think a lot of people didn't expect. I certainly didn't expect that at guard. So they're definitely a winner. I think some of the teams that were hamstrung financially, even with the increase in the salary cap, didn't do a lot. I know folks in Dallas were pounding the table like, let's get something done. They've made some additions, but it's more in the bargain shopping category. And that's not necessarily bad. We need to say that the first wave of free agency is the big shiny one where all the money gets spent. Usually the biggest impact in free agency comes from the second wave, the more reasonably priced contracts. A lot of the impact comes from that second wave. The shiny new additions don't always work out. A lot of times that's where the biggest busts come from. So just because somebody didn't make a move on, it was really day one with all the pre-free agency movement that occurred, and waited until day 2 or day 3 to add a contributor at a more reasonable salary, doesn't mean that's not going to be a really good fit. So I look at like what the Giants did in their secondary. They're in a much better place than they were. I think a lot of teams made smarter ads this year. There wasn't so much silly money outside of the tackle market, because tackle market was just pretty clearly desperation. Like, we need a guy. There's only 3 guys available, and get excited about Dan Moore because we're going to pay him a lot of money, and you just have to do what you have to do. And that's if you get stuck trying to fill a need, not, build depth or anything else, but to literally grab a starter in free agency, you're going to pay more than you should. That's just how free agency works. So those folks that got caught out without a tackle and didn't feel good about this tackle class in the draft, or their ability to go get one of the top tackles for whatever their need was, especially if it was a starter, had to overpay. And that for me puts them in the loser category, because that player, regardless of whether it's Dan Morgan or somebody else, or not Dan Morgan, sorry, fill in the tackle's name. Dan, what's his name that made $80 million? Dan Moore.
Dan Moore, right? He got to $820.5, I think, from
for 4.
Tennessee, from Pittsburgh to Tennessee. Yeah, that was a massive move.
Is he quote unquote worth that? Look, he's a decent tackle. He's not terrible. He's not bottom of the barrel, but I certainly wouldn't have been happy if my team paid him that much money, but they had to, again, to get him in. So that limits their ability to give that money, in their case, to try and, build the defense or spread that around. They have to tie it up because they didn't really have any options. So when you get back into a corner in free agency, it gets really expensive, and you can end up with some decisions that you're not super thrilled about.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of the Sam Darnold signing by Seattle? They traded away Geno Smith. Obviously, Pete Carroll in his late 70s probably didn't have the stomach to, draft a rookie quarterback to develop. Wait for them to develop, and this is not exactly a great year for that, unfortunately.
True.
So, kind of ironic he went to Seattle, where they ran him out of town, and then Seattle kind of obliged and gave Geno Smith for, I believe, it's a 3rd-round pick. You live in Northwest, that region. What is the reaction up there? And are you surprised, they replaced Geno Smith with Sam Darnold?
I don't know. It's so much that they replaced Geno Smith. I think Geno. It's really interesting. The reaction around here has been loud and varied. Some folks, solidly in Geno's camp. Some people, were happy to see him go. I think they're kind of outing themselves as non-ball knowers if that's the case, because Geno has been making chicken salad out of chicken feathers up here for a couple of years. And the initial thing was, they lowballed him and he said no and he left. It later came out from one of the well-tenured local reporters that they offered him around 40 million, somewhere between 40 and 45, which was, the asking price. It's probably closer to 40 than 45. So it wasn't right at the top of the market. And that Geno said no and didn't counter. He didn't say, no, it needs to be 42 or 43 if I'm going to stay. He just said no. And I think that probably surprised the Hawks a little bit. I think they thought they were probably in a better position there than they were. And if you look at it from Geno's perspective, that makes a lot of sense. He's got a coach that he loved playing for. He absolutely loves Pete. He can go play inside, and Dome Geno is a thing. Like, he doesn't play as well outside, and the Seahawks home stadium is open air. And he can go to a place where people are not going to get on his case and misunderstand what he's done. And instead of being, the guy that's, getting tomatoes thrown at him, he's the conquering hero rolling into town. So he gets a great contract. He gets to play inside. He gets to play for a coach he loves. That all seems like a win. So from Geno's perspective, it's a big upgrade in his own personal career, I think. I think Seattle thought they had him and then they didn't. So it's not that they hadn't had conversations with Darnold's agent. They certainly had. At that point, it intensified to, no, we're getting this. It was a bit more like the Bears and Drew Dahlman at that point. Like, we need to have Sam here because our other option just left town. And without this, we're not going to be competitive. So pretty much write your own check, Sam. You're coming to Seattle.
Mm-hmm. Other quarterbacks that changed their, teams. Daniel Jones goes to, Indy. Now he has to compete with the quarterback that was drafted, Anthony Richardson, who is now already in his third year and hasn't really taken off like others. How do you see that one playing out? Do you honestly believe that Jones is going to beat out Richardson right now if the camp to happen today?
Yeah, I think he probably will, and that hurts my heart a little bit because I'm a huge Anthony Richardson fan. I know his quarterback coaches, not just quarterback coach, but the group that he works out with. They're extremely high on not only the person, the player, the talent, but it hasn't translated to grass. Like, the things that they see in practice and the things that we've all seen on tape haven't shown up regularly. Like, it has not gelled into a cohesive package that is going to win games in the NFL. And that's so difficult to watch because it's a transcendently talented player who is not reaching their ceiling right now. And, as football fans, we want to see all those guys reach their ceiling because it's just more fun to watch when Anthony Richardson's absolutely going off. That hasn't happened. I've been one of the largest Daniel Jones detractors out there for years, 4 or 5 years at this point. Never really saw it when he was coming out. Remained hopeful that he too would improve and hit a ceiling that I didn't see. Never really happened. He's a tough player. He is a running threat. He's gotten smarter. He's gotten more efficient. He's gotten better. But that's not to say he's gotten good. He is still a bottom tier quarterback. And for me to sit here and say, yeah, I think he's probably going to beat out Anthony Richardson, short of AR really making a huge leap in year 3, is hard to say, but it's probably the realistic thing. He is going to give them a more moderated outcome, right? It's not going to be so high and low. They're going to be able to kind of know what they're getting, even if it's not great, and work with that and try and win from that perspective. It's a more conservative brand of football, certainly, than you'd be playing with AR. But, I think they might be ready for that already, which is tough because the Anthony Richardson experience so far has been a roller coaster.
Mm-hmm. Which edition do you like better? Washington adding Deebo Samuel or LA Rams signing Davante Adams?
Oh, that's a great question. I think probably Adams, because I think he's the classic late career receiver who is a total pro and is going to mesh really well with Stafford. I think those two are going to click. It doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes those personalities are very different, or the approach to the game is very different. I think Stafford and Davante Adams see the game very similarly. So I think that relationship is going to thrive. And that's a scary prospect for folks in the NFC West because they're still two very good players, again, at the very tail end of their careers, but neither has fallen off. I mean, Davante fell off a little bit last year physically. Stafford, he's the Energizer Bunny at this point. I keep saying, oh man, all the injuries have got to catch up with him. He keeps going out there and slinging it and playing the sheriff and making it work. So I think that's probably higher on my list. Deebo's interesting because he fell off last year as well, and he's got this incredibly physical play style, and you wonder if that's just a blip and that he'll, return to form of being near unstoppable, which he was for 2 or 3 years there, or if that was the top of the mountain and now we're on the backside and it's just another weapon, which I don't mind for Washington. I think that's a good approach to surround the young quarterback who you now know is your franchise and Jaden Daniels and give him more options. I don't hate it at all. It's just a question of which Deebo is really going to show up. The one that started to slide and was not the sort of game-changing force. I don't know if older Deebo is going to be okay with being a supporting role player, or if he still thinks he has to be the alpha, because he certainly has an alpha mentality. So sometimes, again, players aren't very honest with themselves about where they're actually at and what they can actually do. And that can cause a lot of problems when somebody's out there at, 60% of what they were still saying, man, every ball should be coming my way. And, the offensive coordinator's like, nah, it shouldn't, the right amount are coming your way. So we'll see. It's both of them are fascinating additions. And I don't think either one of them are bad.
Do you like what the Bengals did by paying or even overpaying for both Jamar Chase and T. Higgins? And what do you think happens with Trey Hendrickson?
It's a really good question. Trey's in a rough spot. We'll start with the receivers. Certainly one of the questions on everybody's mind because it's a different way to build a team.
It is.
The way to tie up that much money in a single position before this has just been quarterback. And that's kind of been accepted at this point. 4 or 5 years ago, we hit that. Look, you're going to have to pay them $40 or $50 million when they hit that. If you want to keep them, if they're at the top of the game, because they're worth it, they're quarterbacks. And without one, you're not going to win. So I think we crossed that bridge with quarterbacks, but we hadn't really crossed it with wide receivers that, certainly there've been a couple of pay jumps that have been very significant in the last couple of years. And we were sort of edging towards it. And that's why everybody said for the last couple of years, they're not going to be able to sign T. They just can't do it financially. And the Bengals said, yeah, we can do it financially. Yes, you all saw it the right way, but we believe that this is the way forward, that we're going to concentrate all this money in 4 or 5 top guys. And we're just going to fill in the ranks. We think we can do that with lower price talent, and we're going to see if we can win. It's fascinating because both of those players are really good. Both of those players could be, one is a number one. I think T could absolutely be a number one. There's a lot of number 2 receivers that wouldn't thrive in that role. I think T would. He's that good. And when you put them on the field together, they do have a synergy that causes defenses a lot of problems because it's not just, you can't just double Jamar now. It's that we're going to have big problems from either side of the field on every down, and Burrow as a quarterback also sort of adds to that offensive alchemy because he will spread the ball around. If somebody's open, he's one of those guys that you look at the end of the game in the box score, he hit 9 receivers during the game because that's who was open. He hit the backs, he hit the tight ends, he hit the third receiver. Yoshivas had a great, second half of the season last year, and Burrow will just hit him. So the 3 of them together cause a real solid problem, but everybody's like, yeah, but can they build the rest of the team to be competitive? Hendrickson, on the other hand, is in a really tough spot. He wanted out. They weren't going to pay him. He certainly deserved it, even at his age. He's one of the top 5 defensive ends in football or edges in football, and he's not 5. He's probably 3rd. He did all that last year without any help. Everybody knew that he was the only threat defensively for the Bengals all year last year, and he still had that kind of year. He is a very, very good player. He has not fallen off yet. He deserves big money. And the longer they made him wait because the team has leverage, because they don't have to trade him, and all he can do is sit out, which is detrimental to him at his age. So they can say, hey, we'll open it up. But they also said, we need a first rounder, which nobody's really getting first rounders for older players with big contracts, especially players that need new contracts. So it was basically saying, we're not trading him. And everybody said, we don't believe you. You're bluffing. You'll drop it to a second. And they didn't. And so Trey has to sit. All the money goes off the table in free agency, goes to other players. Now there's not a lot of teams that could fit him under the cap. There are some for sure. Absolutely. People could get creative if they wanted to sign him, but nobody's going to give up that first round pick. So the Bengals can sit there and say, hey, let's talk. Let's see if we can make you happy. And they said they want to. Joe has said that he wants that to happen, which did make a difference with the wide receivers. So we'll see if it happens. But I feel for Trey because he's a very talented player. He does not have long left in his career. Just looking at history, he might have another 3 or 4 years tops at the top level. And this is his chance to get paid. And he can't do it for another year because the team has the leverage and they're not willing to let him go. They're not, they know they'll be worse without him, and rightfully so. And so they said no, basically.
Let's end the free agency conversation with this one. Is Aaron Rodgers going to Steelers, or do you feel like, the Steelers are just basically kind of on the holding pattern, or is Vikings going to come in and, do another Brett Favre again?
Yeah, the Vikings, I think, are out. And the Giants, I think, after signing both Jameis and Russ, are definitely out. Because that would be a hell of a quarterback room. But I know the Steelers. How do I phrase this? I know they think they want it, and they might think that they can do that. I would encourage them strongly to look at last year's Jets play and results as the best they're going to get. And it's probably only going to go down from there. And there's an aura of Rodgers because he was so good for so long, and he's not anymore. He can still do more than a lot of any other quarterback that's on the market for sure, but it's not anywhere near what it was. And it comes with a lot of stuff. And I know the Steelers know that. I would like to see them go a different direction. That is going to be painful. There's not really anybody left in the free agency market that's going to help them from a starter perspective. And they're not in a great position in the draft to get a quarterback that's going to help them this year either. So it's going to be rugged. I think the Aaron experience will be rugged. I think if they, went out and got another free agent at this point, it would still be rugged. And if they draft a rookie where they're going to be able to draft one, it's also going to be rugged. Now, could they, hit a gem, right? Could they draft, I don't know, insert quarterback you like here, Jackson Dart, and he could be throwing bombs to DK and George, and that would look fun and interesting. Well, yeah, but there's also holes in Jackson Dart's game, and pro defensive coordinators are going to expose those. So, but maybe he does develop, and maybe he becomes the quarterback for the future at a lower cost, and that I think has more promise than anything else. So if I was them, that's kind of the pill I would swallow. But they seem resolute that they're willing to wait for Aaron Rodgers. And at this point, I don't believe that I would be. Easy for me to say because I'm not a GM that's going to get fired if it doesn't work out. But for me, I would go to the draft, pick the quarterback that I had the option to pick, that I liked the best, and see if I could make that work with everything else that I've built. My good young offensive line, my retooled rushing attack, which I can add pieces to in this draft because the running backs are really deep. I've got a great tight end. I've got some really good wide receivers. Like, I've got stuff there. Maybe I can take a bunch of load off the young quarterback's plate and make that work and see if he develops in year two. I know it's not likely percentage wise, but I think I would take that small chance as opposed to the other options.
My guest tonight is EJ Snyder, the co-founder Bootleg Football. You can find his work along with his co-partner Brett Kollmann on YouTube by entering Bootleg Football. All right, now let's get to the NFL draft preview. Let's talk about the Chicago Bears picking at number 10. There has been some, popular names that has been linked to, with the Bears. Ashton Jeanty, Will Campbell for quite a while. I think it was Will Campbell for quite a while. And then Armand Membu from Missouri. And now it's Ashton Jeanty. Now it seems as though Jeanty is going a lot earlier than anybody's imagining. I would expect maybe Las Vegas.
God, I still do it. I do that in San Diego too, so you're not alone.
Yeah, Las Vegas probably picks him, Jeanty at 6, because I think Carroll wants to recreate the backfield that he had in Seattle. Ashton Jeanty being his, Marshawn Lynch and stuff like that. What are the odds of Jeanty lasting at 10? And EJ, would you take Ashton Jeanty at number 10 if you're the Bears?
I'll start with the first question first. The odds are shrinking by the day. Ashton Jeanty is a very, very, very good football player. So it is quite possible he does not make it to 10. If he made it to 10, yes, I would take Ashton Jeanty in a heartbeat for the Bears at 10, not only because of what they've done in terms of free agency to ready the team for him. If they had not fixed the offensive line, I would not do that. If Ben Johnson was not the coach, I would not do that. Ben Johnson is the coach, and they did fix the offensive line, and Ashton Jeanty is worth every penny of the number 10 pick for sure. So yes, I would. Is he going to get there? I don't think he is. If he does, I'll do backflips. I'll be super thrilled. He is a tremendous football player. I love watching him play. It would be awesome if he ended up on my favorite team.
If Jeanty is not there, which I do believe that odds are becoming more and more likely, are dwindling. Um, who would you take at number 10 out of these players? Let's say Campbell, Membo, and Tyler Warren's name has started to appear in some mock drafts right now. Out of the three, who would you pick? And if there's anybody that I'm missing, EJ, that the Bears could use that I'm really missing out on, give us a name.
Yeah, it's really difficult. 10 is difficult in this draft because it is not a top heavy draft. Everybody's been saying it's a bad draft for a long time, and I don't believe that. Maybe it's just because I'm a draft guy, but it is a different draft. It is a more complicated draft in that there's a lot more beauty in the eye of the beholder. There is a wider middle class with a lot of very similar grades. It is a challenging draft that way. So 10 is a problem, not because there's not good players available, but because there's a lot of tropes about the draft that people keep throwing out there as if it was a normal year. And it is not a normal year. There are not 4 or 5 good offensive tackles that play left tackle right at the top of the draft. There are not 3 or 4 quarterbacks that people are going to trade up for and give you a bevy of picks for. There are not 3 or 4 dominant wide receivers like there were last year. There are a lot of good receivers, but again, everybody goes, well, you can't pick that at 10. You can't pick a running back at 10. You can't pick a tight end at 10. You can't pick a safety at 10. You can't pick, whatever. And in typical years, I would agree with you. The numbers say that's not a good use of resources. You should absolutely focus on edge rusher. You should absolutely focus on offensive tackle, quarterback if you don't have one, wide receiver, the very expensive positions. It makes a lot of sense to invest up high. This is not that year. When you're looking at who you should pick, you need a good football player at 10. Your likelihood to trade down is unlikely because who are people going to trade up for? You have to keep that in mind, right? It's not going to be a quarterback. It's not likely going to be one of the edge rushers. If it is, I'll celebrate. If the Bears can trade down 4 or 5 spots or 7 spots or whatever, and somebody takes an edge that they weren't going to take anyways, and they get extra picks out of it, neat. But I don't think that's going to happen. So let's just say you have to stick and pick at 10, and you're looking at these options. You're looking at Campbell, who I don't necessarily love, Membu, who I like a lot, but he's a right tackle. And you're taking your number 10 pick, and he's ideally going to sit for a year. He's going to sit as your third tackle, which is great for depth, but really you're taking a depth player with number 10. That's not the ideal. The ideal is you're getting a blue chip player who is going to contribute to your football team right away and is also going to contribute for you down the line. So you really end up just literally looking at who the best football player is, which is why I would take Genty at 10 if he's there. He is hands down the best football player available of the bunch. If he's not there, I don't really love Campbell, so I'm not wild about that pick. Membu's going to sit for a year. I love him as an athlete. He'd be a great third tackle, and he would give the Bears presumably some leverage in the Braxton Jones talks next year because Braxton Jones is in line for about $24 million a year next year if he plays well. That's a lot of money if you're not completely sold on if Ben's not completely sold on Braxton Jones. So it would give you a bargaining chip, but none of that sounds like a number 10 pick. I mean, stop me if you've heard this before. Tyler Warren's really interesting because he's a very good football player. He's super diverse. It's not a replacement for Cole Kmet per se. It's the ability to play 12 personnel with a lot of dynamic movement. For those that don't know, Tyler Warren got lined up all over the formation for Penn State. They lined him out wide, in the slot, as a fullback, as a quarterback. He ran wildcat for them, goal line dives. He threw passes for them. He was a high school quarterback. So he's a very versatile player. But again, you're looking at a tight end that some people don't even say is the number 1 tight end. Some people, that's Colston Loveland at number 10. And everybody goes, well, you can't do that. Well, what are you going to do then? They go, well, you have to pick a tackle. And I'm like, okay, which one? And we're right back to Campbell and Membu, and I don't love those options. There's not a guard that is worth it or that they need. There is not a preeminent center. I don't think anybody's taking a safety to be the second or third safety in Malachi Starks. Like
for them too, yeah.
Like Jahad Campbell is a great linebacker out of Alabama, but again, he would be the third linebacker for this year. Could again set them up in a good position. He could be a role player as an edge rusher. He was an edge rusher coming in. He was recruited as one. So you're just looking at all these kind of sort of, if and scenarios, and there is not a clear choice. Like if this happens, if Genty's off the board and you can't trade back, what do? you're kind of stuck. You need to take the best football player available. For me, I would probably take Tyler Warren. And I like Tyler Warren as a football player. I like his character. I like his versatility. I'm very sure that Ben Johnson is going to be able to use him well. And I know people are going to scream the top of their lungs, you don't take a tight end at 10. My answer is then show me the work. What would you do? Show me your answer.
Exactly.
Because there's not a lot of good answers. And it's not just for me. We did our mock draft with Trevor and Connor on the NFL Stock Exchange the other day. And really these conversations, we did every team. And these conversations start at like 5. Like it's not just the Bears at 10. Everybody says, oh, 10 sucks. You could be sitting at 6 right now. Outside of if the Raiders don't want Genty, and saying the same thing, like, well, there's nothing we love here. There's nothing that's great. Can you get a good player? Certainly you can get a good player, and you need to. And that's really what you need to concentrate on, and not so much like, oh, well, they were ranked at 20 and I picked them at 10. If they're the player that fits with what you want to do, and you're very sure about their, ability and football character, you just pick them outside of, what position they play or where they were ranked on somebody else's board. You just go get a good player, because the worst thing that could happen is you go, well, you have to pick a tackle, and then you pick a tackle that's not very good or doesn't fit your system. And everybody goes, well, you had to pick a tackle. No, you don't have to. You have to pick a good football player.
Right. So should the Bears, instead of trading down, trade up, in your opinion, to get somebody else like Mason Graham or Abdul Carter if they're still around 4 or 5, or you wouldn't do that?
I wouldn't this year, because I really like the middle of the draft, and I think there are a lot of talented football players. The Bears are not done. They're not one player away. The only caveat or asterisk I would put up there is if Abdul Carter slides to 4, and it is possible that he will. There's a world in which he makes it to 4. I would call if I was Poles, because the other thing about this draft is the trade up prices are not going to be commensurate with previous years. Nobody's going to be willing to give up the same amount of resources to move up, no matter what the chart says, because the players aren't there, right? There aren't a bevy of offensive tackles and quarterbacks and wide receivers that everybody wants to trade up for. So people will say, look, I'll trade up, but it's going to be 70 cents on the dollar. Like, I'm not going to give you full value. And some teams that have more holes might say, hey, I'll take the extra picks, even though they're not higher picks, because again, there's this wide middle class in this draft. There's a lot of players I can get down the board that will help my football team. Okay, I'll do it. Now, would they do that for a preeminent player like Carter? And the answer is, I don't think they would. So if he gets there, which is if number 1, would they be willing to take less for a trade up? I don't think they should. So it's unlikely, but I would at least call and take the temperature of whoever has that pick, if he's still on the board, and say, hey, what would it take to get him? Because I think he's probably the one player that might be available that the Bears would need. They do have a need at edge.
Yes.
And it matches up that way. The cost would still be pretty terrible. Like, you're going to end up giving up probably next year's first. If you only had to give up next year's second, it would still be costly, but it would be kind of a win, because Abdul Carter he's not one of one, but he's one of a very few. And he's the only guy I would call about. The other guys, absolutely not.
Okay. So 39 or 41 pick, there are 2 second-round picks. You probably have to give up at least one of those to move up, right? If you're,
I would think that you might have to give up both and something else.
Really? Oh my!
If you're going from 10 to 3 or 4, let's say he's at 4, 10 to 4. That 10 to 4 is a huge jump, like point wise. You're giving up a lot of points. So you might end up giving up those 2 and next year's second, which is a ton. And I don't love that, because unlike 10, when the Bears get to 39 and 41, the script flips. And now you're into that value portion of the draft where there are a lot of guys that start to line up with positions of need that really kind of fit on your board, and they're not wildly out of range for where they're ranked. And you start getting what I would call good value. Whereas 10, I just don't feel like there's a ton of good value. So you just pick a good player. 39 and 41, I think that turns around and you do get that.
Yeah, I don't want to give up that much just to get one guy, in my opinion,
Yep, I would agree.
Yeah. So if the Bears do trade down, and if, say, Indy or Miami wants to move up because they want Tyler Warren or somebody else, and you move down to 13 and 14 range, that seemed like a pretty decent spot still. You could, get a decent player out of it.
Yeah.
I know the edge is a big need for the Bears. Dennis Allen obviously has this liking for certain players at a certain measurables. You would say. I'm trying to figure out, is Shamar Stewart worth taking that high, or you would just run away from him because of
not for me. I did my deep dive on Shamar this weekend, and I had already done one of his line mates. I did the other one after him. I'm not a fan. Like, he's a tremendous athlete. He's not a great football player. And so just the same argument we had at your top pick, that high up, you need a good football player. And he's not a good football player right now. He's a tremendous athlete. He is a untapped potential guy. He's not a good football player right now. And I know people will come after me and say, but I watched the tape. I wrote my report. I know the kind of athlete he is. Athletes don't always make great football players. Some great football players are not great athletes. Like, they overcome that. He's the opposite. He has every physical gift in the world. And, the only way I'm going to get really excited is if he maybe gets drafted by like San Francisco and goes to work with Chris Kasurek. Like, at that point, I'd be like, okay, it's kind of like when a lineman gets drafted and goes, to Philadelphia, and you're like, oh, okay. Like, they're going to work with those guys. Okay. They're probably going to be good no matter what. For the Bears,
who's the better edge for the Bears, man?
What's that?
Who's the better edge fit for the Bears?
In the first round, I don't think there is one. I really don't, because I like players there, but they are not values, and the Bears are not likely to draft them. So I like James Pierce as a player. There are enough red flags. I doubt he's that high on the Bears board, if he's there at all. And the same thing with Mike Green. I really like Mike Green as a player. I think there is a very, very slim chance that Chicago would select him, given his off-field issues. So I like the players. Neither is a tremendous fit with Dennis Allen's defense, size-wise. Pierce is closer, but I just like them as pass rushers, but I don't think either one is bound for Chicago. So again, now you're into that, hey, 39 or 41 looks pretty good to select an edge. And there is a sweet spot there of like 4 or 5 good edges that have the right size, the right aggressiveness, the right play style, and will be available in that, say, 30 to like 50 range, which is, you've got 2 picks right there. So Donovan Izraku from Boston College is probably the headliner on that list. Then Nick Scorton is going to be there. That's Shamar Stewart's line mate from Texas A&M. He's got a great frame and is a much better football player than either of his 2 Texas A&M line mates in this draft. I know a lot of people like Landon Jackson. I think Dennis Allen might like Landon Jackson. That kind of scares me a little bit. He's not my favorite.
And I know we touched on this Twitter. Braden Swinson.
Braden Swinson and JTT from Ohio State are the last 2 in that group.
Yes.
Yeah, I think both of those guys would be great fits. I think they'd fit very well with not only size profile but play style. I like Swinson a little better as a pure pass rusher, but he's also a very good edge setter. JT is a lot bigger than people think. He's up in the 280s. Like, he can really play. He's my favorite of the 2 Ohio State edges. Princely Umanmielen from Ole Miss is there as well. He's a Florida transfer. He's got good size. I think he'd be more rotational, which would be good for him starting off. Any of those guys in 39 to 41, one of those guys, the Bears need somebody at that position. And there's all these guys. Whereas when you look at 10, there's 2 guys they're not going to pick. And then a bunch of like big question marks, like Jalen Walker. I think he's too small. He's definitely not going to fit the system. I don't think he's a good fit for the Bears. So he's out. Michael Williams, another, big and tall sort of athletic guy. Little light for Dennis Allen, but also a project. So are you going project, or are you waiting to your picks that you have at 39 and 41 and getting one of these guys who is already a better football player? Really like Nick Scorton, think he'd be great. Really like Braden Swinson, JTT. Those guys are all going to be there. And if that's your plan, you got 2 picks there, right? So you're going to get one of them. And do something else in the first round. Go get a good football player. Or like you said, if you have the opportunity, rare as it may be, to trade back and pick up some more, awesome. Even if it is 70 cents on the dollar, I have no problem with them moving down, because there's not a lot of difference between 10 and 16 in this draft.
Who do you like as a like an interior defensive lineman? I know the Bears already added Grady Jarrett, and then um, but he's getting up there in age
Yep.
as well. Mason Graham out of the question. Kenneth Grant, Derek Harmon, Walter Nolan.
Yes, yes, and yes. Like
Omar Norman Lott. I hope I'm pronouncing his name.
Yep,
correct.
you got it.
See, just to name a few. I'm sure I'm missing a couple of the other guys, but Tyleek Williams from Ohio State. He had a scare yesterday running the 40 for no apparent reasons whatsoever.
Yeah, we'll see.
Who do you like in out of the bunch that I just mentioned that will seem to fit the Bears interior defensive lineman?
All of them.
Okay.
There's literally not a guy you mentioned that I would be sad about. So Kenneth Grant is huge. We interviewed him at Shrine Bowl. He is tremendously talented and he needs to be more consistent. But when it hits on tape, he is one of those guys that you're like, oh, okay. It's not like Shamar Stewart. He didn't have no production. He just had less production than you might have liked. He did have production. And when you see it, when he puts it all together, unstoppable. So, from that perspective, yeah, absolutely. Walter Nolan, I love, one of my favorite guys in this draft. He was an honorable mention for defensive gems for me. Wins in a lot of different ways. Very talented player. Derek Harmon is just a grown man. He is something else. Super powerful. A lot of people are worried he doesn't finish plays. I'm not worried about that because he stirs the drink a lot for the rest of the defensive line. And he does finish again some plays, not as many as you might like up in that range, but physically as a profile fit, he would be a chess piece for Dennis Allen because he can play 3, he can play 5, he can even move outside, play 6, anywhere in between. He's going to be a real asset, real benefit for you. Tyleek is more run stopper, less pass rusher, but he's very good as a run stopper. So on that alone, he just gets pushed down a little bit in my book, but I like him as a player. He's very solid. Omar Norman Lott is kind of the opposite, the little smaller fireballer, 3-tech penetrator. But again, Bears could use that. That's really the mold that Grady came up in. I don't think Omar is the equal of Grady, but he's a very impactful player. And if you look at his pure pass rush looks, which he had very few of, it's like 100. His win rate was off the charts for an interior defensive lineman. And the thing is, it doesn't stop there. Like, this is so deep as a defensive line class. Last year, there were probably, depending on who you talk to, 20 to anywhere between 19 and like 23 draftable grades for defensive tackles. This year, it's 40.
Wow.
It's literally twice as many. So you can keep going down the list. If you told me that the Bears went out and got Chicago native CJ West, who played at Indiana, I'd be like, great, that's an awesome addition.
Alfred Collins, I forgot to mention.
Alfred Collins, one of my favorites from Texas. He's one of my gems this year. Love him. He would be an amazing addition. You're going to get him somewhere between 45 and 75. I know that sounds like a tremendously wide range, but again, you don't know in this draft class because somebody else might say, well, we want Norman Lott because we want that penetration. Somebody else says, oh, no, we need run stopping. Maybe it's the Bills, and they look at Tyleek Williams and they go, this is the guy we've needed who can just stand in there and stop the run on third down, make sure that nobody's coming through. And they've struggled with that in the past. So it's going to be team specific, scout specific, all the stuff that goes on behind the scenes, coachability, temperament, competitive drive, the stuff we don't really get to see. You're going to see a bunch of these guys go way higher than you thought they were going to go. And you're going to see a bunch of the guys that we just mentioned, maybe at the top of the list, slide because there are so many options and people know they can go back to the well later and get a really talented player. So it's going to cause this tremendous disparity that I think is going to be really fun, but might make a lot of GMs tear their hair out. I don't know.
And I'm kind of a little bit high on maybe more than a lot of people. Joshua Farmer of Florida State, I kind of like him as well. I know Florida State was a hot trash last year. So
no, but it's funny because Florida as well, and you're looking at Cam Jackson out of Florida. So those are two players that I'm just got to recently because I'm trying to get, there's so many defensive tackles, and I had to do some before I went to the All-Star games, some before I went to the Combine. And then, I'm still doing some, and I've got, 22 of them ranked or something right now. And I've literally got another 15 or 18 to go. And that's a whole nother class. That's ridiculous. So guys like Joe Walker, who was a presumptive All-American before this year, played with a back injury. He's going to be on the board at 100, which is bananas. Aeneas Peebles, who's kind of an Omar Norman Lott clone, or some people think a better version of Omar Norman Lott. Jamari Caldwell, the third guy from Oregon. He's really good.
Yeah.
JJ Pegues is one of my favorite defensive linemen in this draft. He's going to go around 100 from Ole Miss. He had 7 touchdowns this year as a fullback. It's just nutty. And then you get all the way down, and the guy I was talking about, Cam Jackson, bunch of boards, he's around 200. This guy's 6'6", 328. Like, he's a beast. And people don't even know who he is. And it's because there are so many players in this defensive line class. This one's going to go down as an all-timer. I mean, NFL teams are going to fill up their trenches on the defensive side for like years to come. And they're going to do it with like 5th and 6th round picks. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. A couple more segments with EJ Snyder, co-founder of Bootleg Football. Thank you for joining us tonight, for almost 600 people joining us, talking about the free agency and the draft. All right, let's look at the top 10 right now. Number 1, obviously, Tennessee has been on the clock since they got number 1. Is this Cam Ward that's going number 1 in your opinion?
I think it is, and it's because they have Will Levis, and Will Levis isn't just bad; he's bad. He's really, really terrible. He's to the point where he's pulling their football team down. They have no hope of winning with him at quarterback unless something miraculous happens. And I think that is a terrible bet if you're an NFL GM waiting for a miracle. So you're sitting there, Cam Ward, opinions vary. Brett, my podcast partner, Bootleg, thinks that Cam Ward would have been the 7th best quarterback last year. I think it's probably closer to 5 for me. Okay. I believe I probably would have had him above McCarthy. I like JJ McCarthy, but I think Cam Ward, if he'd come out last year, would have been probably the 5th quarterback last year for me. But that doesn't mean he's bad, because look at the 4 quarterbacks ahead of him from last year. So
that's true.
I think he is a viable starter. I think with Tennessee, you cannot do another thing. Like people are saying, oh, are they open for business? No, they're not open for business, because if they were to trade that pick, what are they going to then get at quarterback? And the answer is nothing as good as Cam Ward. So it's kind of shooting yourself in the foot for a couple of picks. That's not the point. You go get the quarterback. He is good enough to start as a rookie and legitimately can sell them some tickets, and maybe develop into a mid-round starter or a mid-level starter in the NFL, which is great. Like, if you're the 15th best quarterback in the NFL, that's really, really good. So I think they have to take the swing.
And Cleveland at number 2, that's a kind of a wild card here. Joe Carter's name has been linked heavily right now. Mm-hmm. Do you buy that, or do you feel like Shedeur Sanders?
I don't think it's Shedeur. I think it's probably Kirk Cousins.
Oh, okay. So you think Kirk Cousins will go?
I think Kirk Cousins ends up being a Brown. I think that is their plan for,
would the Browns should give up a 3rd round pick for Cousins, or is that too much?
Well, I don't know. They're going to have to haggle about value, and it's going to depend on how many other suitors he has that are serious, right? Because this is always the game of musical chairs, and people are deciding at this point, like, free agency is pretty well tapped. So it's really somebody that you like in this draft, or Cousins, right? If you're in that sweepstakes. So people might pay more because, again, limited supply, but I don't think too much, because, again, I'm not sure everybody thinks Cousins is going to last. I'm not sure they think he's coming back from what we saw last year, which was a quarterback that really couldn't move and limited Atlanta's offense when he was in there very badly, because he literally couldn't move. So it's better. It's an upgrade for what the Browns are dealing with, but that's not saying a lot. I think that's probably their plan, is to get Cousins, bridge it for a year or 2. So that puts them back, on the seat. I'm sure they're open for business. I don't know that anybody really wants to trade up for, my guess is probably Hunter, maybe Carter, but in the Browns case, sure, they're going to say, absolutely, we'll take Abdul Carter, because if they didn't, then nobody would trade up if he was the guy on the board. I think if they have to stick and pick, and Cousins is their choice at quarterback, they probably pick Hunter. I know they want to move on from Newsome. So, like, I I think they probably pick Hunter. And that's not a bad pick. He's a tremendous player.
Yeah.
But if we're just going sort of chalk at the top of the draft, no trades, yeah, Cam Ward. And then my guess would be Hunter over Carter for the Browns, not necessarily as a player or a talent or whatever else, but he's an immensely talented player that would fit better in Cleveland.
And what about the Giants at 3? Will the addition of Wilson and Winston stop them from, say, drafting Shadir Sanders? Or do you think that they would be either content with picking Travis Hunter if he's still there at number 3? Or who else is, do you think?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. And like I said, this isn't a Bears specific problem at 10 where it only gets weird at 10. It literally gets weird at 3 if this is the scenario. Yeah. Because I don't think they're picking Sanders at 3. Doesn't mean they're not picking him, means they're not picking him at 3. So they're open for business because, again, here's a scenario where Carter's on the board. They don't necessarily need him. If they do draft him, they're going to put Kayvon Thibodeau up for trade and pair him with Brian Burns, which would be amazing, and Dex in the middle. I mean, that's especially with, again, the work they did in free agency to fix up their secondary. That's a real defense at that point. Like, it's really scary. So they could stick and pick, but they're also gonna open their ears and say, hey, who wants Abdul Carter? Because we already have 2 edges. You know, what will you give? What will you give for him? And you know, we'll hear that. I don't think I would be very surprised if they picked Sanders at 3. That's my caveat. I would not be surprised if they picked Sanders, but at 3, it would surprise me. So I think they open it up for trade. And if that doesn't happen, that's where it gets fascinating. Because in this scenario, Hunter's off the board at 2. Do they then pick Carter, who is clearly the best player left on the board, and try and trade Thibodeau, which would be interesting for a lot of teams. I think Thibodeau is a useful edge in the NFL, and there would be a market for him. It wouldn't, you know, be an equal of the pick they just spent, but they would have an arguably better player. So it's a fascinating kind of, do they go up? Do they go down? Do they stay? If they stay, who do they pick? Like, there are no sure things after, well, I mean, in my mind, after 1. So
New England 4. Boy, I know they would like Travis Hunter there.
If he's gone, I think it's Membu. I think, again, if whoever picks Carter at 3, whether it's the Giants or somebody they trade the pick to, let's assume that Ward, Hunter, and Carter are the first 3 off the board. Yes, the Pats will be sad because they want both of those previous players, and both would be a great fit, but so would Membu. Membu would be a very nice consolation prize at 4. They
right. Well, they need to protect Drake May too. So.
Yeah. They go cry in their beer, but Membu is a very nice consolation prize.
And at 5, Jacksonville. This has to be where Mason Graham has to be picked, right?
I don't think has to be, but he has been the chalk pick for them since before the combine, and it hasn't really changed. They could also go corner, but again, in this draft, if Hunter's off the board, I don't think there's a corner worth it. Like, Jahdae Barron is a very good corner and would fit well with what they do, but do you take him at 5? I don't think you do. I would not pick Mason Graham at 5 if I was a GM, but do I think it's a very likely spot for him to go off the board? I do.
And obviously, the popular name that has been linked to some, teams, not necessarily in the top 10, but obviously that's been skyrocketing, is Ole Miss quarterback Jackson Dart. How far how high do you think he actually would go?
I don't think he goes top 10. I would be surprised, and it would require, in my mind, Shedeur being picked before he is, and somebody sort of panicking. Now, that does happen. I would be surprised if it happened in this draft. I think cooler heads will prevail. I know that's a crazy thing to say about the NFL draft, but I don't think teams value him that highly that they're going to force their way into the rare air of the top 10, because it is very expensive to do so. And I think it's going to be cost prohibitive if people try and do that draft capital wise. So again, is he gonna last to a pick where?
How about Pittsburgh at 21? I know this may seem like another Kenny Pickett 2.0 in some mind.
Yeah, I don't think it is. He's a very different player than Kenny Pickett. I would be fascinated by that fit. Like, as a fit, I think that would be a lot of fun, because Jackson Dart does throw the deep ball extremely well. And he did it at Ole Miss. He has Jackson Dart's tape's kind of fun. It can be frustrating, but it's also kind of fun because at least 2 or 3 times a game, he will drop a ball in the bucket outside the numbers, 20 plus yards down the field. And I mean, undefendable stuff. Receiver literally just has to put his hands out. Defensive back can't get to it. And he does it routinely. Now, his mechanics might drive you up a wall, whatever. Can't argue with the results. The ball gets there, and Ole Miss got chunk play after chunk play down the outside because Jackson Dart can throw that particular pass. And if you got DK and George Pickens, like, you can make an offense out of that. So it would be fascinating.
And outside of Genty, who's the best running back in your opinion? And will that player, say Omari and Hampton, will he go in the first round, or do you think it's Genty, the only person that's going?
Genty certainly goes in the first round. We've been talking about him now for a while. People are like, oh, the Bears can't take him. And now they're like, they're not going to be able to take him. So we're getting down there. Omari and Hampton, to me, is absolutely a first round running back. He would be clearly RB1 in this draft if Genty didn't exist. I've been singing Omari and Hampton's praises for 2 years. He is the full meal deal. He is a workhorse. He is a number one. He can give you breakaway speed, power, moves, great vision. He is more than functional in the passing game. He is a complete back that is built like a horse. He can take punishment in the NFL. I don't have any real qualms about Omari and Hampton. And honestly, if you said that Genty was off the board and the Bears were out on the edges we talked about, didn't like the tackles, and didn't think that Tyler Warren was a value, or again, thought that there was a tight end later on down, like Gunnar Helm from Texas, that really fit what they were going to do as well or better, I wouldn't be shocked if Ben Johnson said, I want my running back. He clearly did in Detroit. When they took Jahmyr Gibbs, everybody said, including me, what are you doing? And 2 years later, Jahmyr Gibbs is the engine of that offense without question. So if Chicago shocked the world at 10 and took Omari and Hampton with Genty off the board, there would be hue and cry. You know, there would. I would be kind of quiet and just slink into the background, because as soon as Omari and Hampton touches the football, he's going to be a fan favorite in Chicago. Behind that offensive line, let's go. So I'm not saying that should be the move. I'm saying if that was a wild move that Chicago pulled, knowing how good that player is, I would be like, okay, again, don't love the surrounding options. If you wanted your running back, it's not just settling for RB2. Like, the way they're ranked is Genty, Hampton, there's a gap. There's 3 or 4 more guys. There's a gap. There's 3 or 4 more guys. He's in the top tier. Is he the top back? He's not. Does he deserve to be in the top tier? Absolutely.
And let me end this live stream with this question. The Bears obviously were at the Ohio State Pro Day. I believe that was yesterday. And, both Poles and Ben Johnson were seen together, I think, for the first time this offseason.
Yeah.
So do you buy into the fact that they were, there together instead of, say, Boise State watching Ashton Genty on the same day? Or do you think this is a significant development where you have the head coach and the GM being together in the same campus? Now, granted, Ohio State is loaded.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it is significant, but the people have to sort of place that significance. Is it Judkins? Is it, did they want a really good look at Simmons' knee, right? This is a team with a left tackle that, if he was healthy, would be the presumptive top tackle in this draft, right? He would at least be number 2. He is incredibly skilled, but he had a knee injury, patellar tendon. So Donovan Jackson is a guard / tackle, depending on, where he played in the season. Because when Simmons went down, Jackson moved to the outside. So he's one of those players that has tremendous versatility. Everybody's looking at him. We talked about both of their edges and their DTs. So you got JTT on one side, Sawyer on the other. You got Tyleik Williams in the middle. You've got a corner there and Denzel Burke. Like, there's a ton of guys. Emeka's there, right? Maybe they're looking at Emeka. I mean, you want to talk about a truly upset the apple cart move? Pick Emeka at 10, because he's just a great football player, right? And then imagine that becomes, I had this discussion yesterday with somebody, a little bit of a mini debate. If the Bears did that, I don't think they will. I'm not even saying they should. If the Bears did that and you are starting DJ, Rome, and Emeka, is there a better trio? Has to be trio, can't be duo. Is there a better trio of starting wide receivers in the NFL? And my answer is, I don't think so. Like, maybe one you could argue is close, but like,
yeah,
I don't think like you in Ben Johnson's offense. Are you kidding me? And people, oh, he's only going to get, 6 targets a game, and he's going to be target number 7 in a Ben Johnson offense. And like, all those things are true, but DJ's not going to be around forever. And you're telling me that Emeka and Rome would be bad as your starting duo? Emeka is one of the highest floor players in this entire draft, regardless of position. So I know people would freak out and say, oh, we already have receivers, and they got Zacchaeus, and like, I get it, but like, they could be there looking at any of those players. Maybe they've got a crazy Will Howard itch. I don't, but maybe Ben wanted a closer look. Who knows? So many players at Ohio State. It's very close. Obviously, Chicago, it's not a huge trip. So, of course, they're going to go up there. It's the national champs. They have a ton of talent. I wouldn't be surprised if they were looking at Seth McLaughlin, the center, who was also injured. Like, the Bears could use a backup center. Maybe the one they have on the roster from Arkansas works out. Maybe not. Maybe they pick up Seth with that pick way down the board, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's what they're looking
at. Sorry about that. I apologize. Go ahead.
That's fine. No, I mean, that maybe they're looking at Seth thinking, hey, at 148, if Seth's still there, if he's healthy, that is a very good card to have. Like I said at the top of the show, they're not done with offensive line. Like, now we know we have a backup center. If Drew Dahlman goes down, God forbid, knock on wood, Drew Dahlman goes down in camp, you've got an answer. And you don't have to start the year again with a hole in the middle of the line. So any number of reasons they could have been there.
Mm-hmm. Let me finish this with this thought here. Who's a better running back from the Ohio State that would fit the Ben Johnson's offense?
Judkins, 100% for me.
Okay.
Like, I know a lot of people like Travion. He is a tremendous pass blocker. He is a home run hitter. He's one of the best pass protecting running backs in this draft. And make no mistake, that will make him a darling of NFL teams. They love that. They eat that up. They want their quarterbacks to stay upright. He is a dog in pass protection. No question about that. He's a good receiver as well, and he is a verified home run hitter. He has some of the best game speed of any back in this draft, and there are some fast ones. He's right up there at the top. I don't love his vision. I don't love his tackle breaking ability. He has some runs where his vision looks good. He reminds me a lot of DeAndre Swift, actually, and they already have DeAndre Swift, right? Vision's not great. Outside, he's a menace. He can take any touch to the house. Can be a factor in the passing game. He's better in pass pro than DeAndre Swift is. But if you're looking at like which piece the Bears could really use, Judkins is also really fast. He's a lot bigger. His vision is better. His feet in traffic are better. He does not have the same top end speed, but he is fast for his size. And I think he's a better all around runner. I think he can run more concepts better than Travion can. He can't run outside zone better than Travion can, but that's one thing, right? And again, the Bears already have Swift. They've shown that they're probably not getting rid of him. And if they need to do that, like, again, he knows how to do that in Ben's offense. So they probably just keep that. And the complement would be Quinshon Judkins.
Well, EJ, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for your time tonight on this Friday night. I can't tell you how excited I am, and we have over 630 people joining us to talk about this. And if you're just joining late, go to my YouTube channel. We had a tremendous conversation right from the get-go to talk about the free agency and talk about the Bears and draft questions and EJ's thoughts on the 10th pick and et cetera, et cetera. So, EJ, thank you for your time tonight. Look forward to doing this again. Hopefully, just right after the draft is over. Maybe we can do a quick look at the other 31 teams and then see who was the best pick, like we did last year, I believe. shortly after the draft, whenever you're available, whenever you're relaxed. And thanks
after I sleep for a week.
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever you are, no
Yeah.
rush. You deserve all the time in the world just after the draft. Certainly, obviously, leading up to it, it's you and Brett do a wonderful job over there at the Bootleg Football as well. Thanks for your time as always, and thank you very much for everybody joining me tonight. And hopefully, you enjoyed our conversation with the EJ Snyder. You can follow EJ as you can see on his Twitter handle at Football EJ, as well as the Bootleg Football on YouTube channel. Enjoy your weekend, EJ. Thanks for your time tonight, and hope to do this again shortly after the draft is over.
Thanks for having me, man. It's always a blast.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you next time on the Double A Team podcast live stream. Enjoy your weekend, everybody.